Welcome to the Paul Street Journal, a production of St. Paul Inside the Walls. The Paul Street Journal is a show all about Catholic economics. From discussing the economic principles laid out in Scripture to answering the economic questions that come up in our daily lives, this show will be your guide to making your own economic decisions with the heart of the Church. I'm Freddy Garcia, and I'm joined by my co-host, Brian Honsberger. Brian, how you doing?
Doing well. How about you, Freddy?
I'm good. Thanks, Brian. So we are in episode 4 of the Paul Street Journal, and we have now moved past the biblical episodes, or at least the foundational biblical episodes, in which we discussed Old Testament principles, New Testament principles, and fulfillment of the Old Testament. And we're now kind of getting to the historical background that we mentioned we were going to touch on. So we got biblical, historical, later on maybe encyclicals, contemporary things. But right now this is first episode where we're touching on kind of historical stuff.
Yes, the first 500 years.
Yeah. And first five, that's... So I want to kind of point something out. So the biblical themes that we touched on, I think, even though, you know, we talked about a lot of the contemporary things of Old Testament times, like the economy, the agricultural economy, and the time of Jesus. Mm-hmm. But the themes in Scripture, I think, can still feel really relevant to someone today. And I think that if we're now talking specifically about historical context, I'm sure that 2,000 years ago, you know, life was a little different. Even if those biblical themes were around like they are today, I don't know if today in 21st century America, life is kind of similar to how it was then. So can you paint a picture for us of what we're dealing with?
Well, we're going to paint that picture for a while today.
Okay.
But it might be a lot more similar than you think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How so?
Yeah. There are elements of the economy in the ancient Roman Empire in the time of Jesus and beyond that are going to sound very familiar. There's other components that are going to sound completely foreign, like a different world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And to be completely upfront with the audience, before recording this episode, you sent me a list of some of the things we'll be discussing today. And I am unfamiliar with just about everything on the list. So I want the audience to know that I'm hoping to be someone in your shoes. I'm representing the audience as maybe people that are eager to learn, eager to ask questions, and hoping that you give us some good guidance and explanations, because we have a lot of content, I think, to go through. But I'm excited to go through it.
Well, Freddie, I'm going to put myself in your shoes and in the shoes of the audience. I personally see myself as like 95% learner, maybe like 5%, you know, professor or teacher or writer. So, okay. So I'm always learning too, and I try not to ever give the same lecture twice or things like that. But today is a very exciting episode, and there is a lot of content. So I have no idea where this is going to go. But I do know that it's fun. It's going to seem familiar and foreign at the same time.
Okay, great. So where do we start?
Well, in the ancient Roman economy, there's a macro economy to talk about, and then there's also like the economic experience that individuals had. So one place to start might be with like this concept that's used in a derogatory way to describe the Roman financial system back then, which is bread and circuses.
Okay, bread and circuses.
Bread and circuses. So, you know, in the early centuries of Christianity, you know, the years 100, 200, 300, the economy was going through a transformation, and people who lived, who were ancestral farmers, were being pushed out of their farming occupations and lands due to giant corporate food production centers. So all of these people who were displaced from their jobs started moving to big cities. So it was corporations took over agriculture, and then individuals were moving into cities, which sounds a little bit like today.
Yeah,
right?
It does.
And the people who were in the cities often were without skills or jobs to survive. So they became dependent on the government for things like food and even entertainment. So this is where we get into bread and circuses.
Okay.
So in the time of Julius Caesar, in the time of Caesar Augustus, all the way up until the end of the Roman Empire, a certain percentage, sometimes small, sometimes large, was totally dependent on something called the bread dole or the grain dole. So this was basically either subsidized or free food for people who needed it. And that's how the masses were kind of kept in check. Like, all right, we're going to give you free food in exchange for obedience, right, to the emperor or to the Senate or to both. So this started as just either subsidized or free grain. In the year 200, there was maybe somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million Romans, like in the city of Rome. So, in the time of Julius Caesar, there might have been like 150,000 or so people on the grain dole, like getting free grain. But it kept getting bigger and bigger century after century to the point where there were hundreds of thousands of people on this and dependent on it. And it went from grain to dough, and dough doesn't last long. So then it went from dough to bread. And then in addition to bread, there was oil and pork and wine, and it just got bigger and bigger. And this was all just, an exchange, right? It was food security for the people in exchange for obedience to the emperor or to the Senate.
Okay. So I want to reel it back a little bit. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about the Roman Empire and the economic life within it. So just to connect it back to Jesus and the Israelites, when does the Roman Empire start, and how do they start to connect to the Israelite people?
Well, Julius Caesar is assassinated by senators primarily, and then Augustus, his adopted son or so, becomes the next emperor. So it's Augustus who is the emperor right around the turn of the millennium. And this is when Jesus is born. Okay. So at that time, by that time, the Israelite people and the nation of Israel and Judea specifically is under control of Rome.
Okay.
Under the control of Rome. So Rome has occupied most of the land and has control of the governing bodies and everything in the land of Israel during the time of Jesus.
And how old is the Roman Empire at that point? When Jesus?
Not too old. Maybe just like 40 or so years old.
Okay.
Right? Because before that, it was the Roman Republic. Right? Okay. So the empire transitions from a republic, where even Julius Caesar was proposing bills to be passed, and sometimes they'd be accepted and sometimes they'd be rejected, and he wasn't totally in power. Mm-hmm. But somewhere between 40 and 50 years before Jesus, it transitions entirely into a empire where there's one guy in charge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And this is important to know. Why did Julius Caesar, even though he wasn't a huge fan of it, why did he accept the bread dole? Well, he needed an ally. And if he was trying to remove the senators from power and increase his own power, he needed an ally. Guess who his ally was?
The people.
The people, right? So by getting the people on his side with bread and circuses, bread being the bread dole, circuses being, all these games, and the Circus Maximus and later in the Colosseum, right? That kind of helped entertain the people and get the people on his side.
Yeah, doesn't sound like it worked out in the end. Though.
Well, I mean, so Julius Caesar was successful in winning the love of the people. Mm-hmm. He the Senate obviously didn't like him, and they killed him, right? So there was a certain level of success, but like the amount of money that was splurged on the bread dough and on these circuses can't be underestimated. People were complaining about the expense that Julius Caesar would spend on these games.
Okay.
There's one instance where there were 2,000 warriors, 2,000 horses on each side just for a fight to the death, game.
Wow.
This is the part that seems foreign to us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, it sure does.
Yeah.
So then the Roman Empire then conquests and then takes over a lot of land. And my question is, I assume it's a lot of military power that the Roman Empire has.
Yes, right? Yes. So the expansion of Rome was definitely a military thing, but it was just as economics. It was just as much about economics. So those small farms that used to be during the time of the Roman Republic, by the time the Roman Empire was expanding, Julius Caesar and his successors started expanding by nations, like, the whole area of France, the whole area of most of Britain, right? Just all at once. Tons of land was suddenly Roman. And all of those small farms turned into these things called latifundia, right? And what is that? It's just a big corporate farming estate. So the small mom and pop farms were no longer, those people couldn't survive against the economy of scale by the latifundia, right? Mm-hmm. So these giant corporate estates, they are the ones that are creating mass amounts of food to fund, to feed Rome, right? So where does the bread dough come from? It comes from a global system, a global system that is totally dependent on foreign nations creating large swaths of food that is then shipped to Rome. So, where are the big bread fields in this time? They're from conquered lands in like Sicily, North Africa, like modern day Tunisia and Algeria, and even modern day Egypt.
Okay, so who becomes the quote unquote owners of these corporate farms? Or
so the greatest beneficiaries of land additions to the empire were Roman senators. Roman senators didn't owe taxes. Generally, there's always exceptions to these rules, but the tax-free status, the huge amounts of money that Roman senators had, gave them a competitive advantage. So oftentimes, senators were the beneficiaries, and they didn't even pay for labor. All of these latifundias were operated by slaves. So this was a slave-driven agricultural economy. Okay. And a lot of the food was given away for free by Rome, but it was always just a percentage of that Roman population that was getting free food. The rest of the food available in Rome was sold, and usually at a premium. So there was money to be made in grain. So let's say you owned a latifundia in Algeria as a Roman senator. You would then bring in a certain amount of grain and sell it at a good market rate and make a profit.
Okay, I see. So is all of this Roman land, now you mentioned that people were moving to cities. So is all of Roman land kind of urbanized now, or is it like there are urban pockets within the Roman land?
Most of the land occupied by Rome or owned by Rome during the empire is agricultural and rural. And most people in the Roman Empire are working an agricultural lifestyle. And there's a lot of slaves, right? But the majority of free people are probably living in cities and living an urban life. right? So there's major segregation, and this isn't racial segregation, right? Like, who are the slaves? They were people who lost in war, people who were unwanted as children and either left to exposure and then raised to be a slave, or sometimes debtors. Were poor parents would, sell their children into this. Yeah. So there was a lot of slaves, and it was a slave-based economy.
Okay, so when you say global economy or model, it's the agricultural areas within Roman Empire, then sending food to the urban.
Yeah. Areas. So, like, let's say you're growing food in North Africa or in Sicily. It's got to be transported to Rome.
Okay.
So the whole economic system, the food system, it depends on shipping. It also depends on speculation. Like, so here's an example.
What is speculation for those listening that may not know?
Well, let me give you an example. Okay. I prefer an example to a definition. I'm really bad at definitions. So here's an example. So in the time of the Roman Empire, bread coming from Sicily was counted on. And people who owned grain distribution businesses, at least once, created a scare saying that there was a slave revolt in Sicily and that the grain wasn't going to be coming to Rome. So guess what happened to the price of grain in Rome?
Goes up.
Skyrockets, right? And who benefits? The people who made this fake news, right?
So it's fake news. Like they would intentionally.
Yeah. Wow. And all of this, so speculation is like basically predicting the price of something before it is something, before it's actually consumed. So what we see is a global system where everything is dependent on another thing, right? That poor person in Rome who's depending on the bread dough is dependent on the trader. The trader is dependent on the shipping. The shippers depend on good weather. The whole farm depends on slaves, like not revolting, right? Like so, and all of that is owned by some senator or some veteran of the military who was given land in compensation for his service, right? So there's a global system where if one of those things falls apart, the whole system falls apart.
Okay.
So it's actually, Rome seemed unbeatable and unstoppable and eternal to the people living at that time. Mm-hmm. But we could see already, if just one of those things falls apart, the whole system is a house of cards.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I think you're painting a good picture economically. I have a question about the political picture. So, is it kind of just like the emperor and senators and military men that are in charge of making sure all of this happens smoothly? Like, where is the power coming from? Who,
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the time of the empire, which is, the entirety of the Christian narrative that we're talking about, the year AD 1 to today we're going to talk about like 499, that first 500 years. The power is largely with the emperor in Rome. Starting in the 300s, the emperor, starts shifting towards Constantinople. So there's a shift of power and of wealth, which we'll talk about later, I hope. But the Roman Senate is very key. Even though they don't have as much power as they did in the time of the Republic, they really help things happen. Okay. They continue to be of assistance for the fabric of society. The emperors are coming and going. They die in battle or they're killed or whatever. The Roman Senate really is an important fabric that continues even beyond the Roman Empire, which we'll talk about next episode.
Okay.
In addition to that, the power structure, it involves a lot of people who hold positions in the economic system. So there is somebody in charge of the bread dole, right? Mm-hmm. That is a very important position. Sometimes even the emperor will take that position upon himself, right? So the military is really important for power at this time too, and it definitely contributes to the economic scene. All right, so early on, and the part of Roman history that everybody knows about, it was usually Roman citizens who fought in the military. But that actually kind of falls away, and Rome becomes more and more dependent on mercenaries, specifically barbarian tribes, like often on the fringes of the empire. They become dependent on these people to serve as their mercenaries, which also has some major implications for Rome's future. We know what happens to Rome eventually, but the term for this is federati. So like these federations of German barbarian clans or tribes, they sign like agreements and deals with Rome. So Rome will say, okay, we want you to protect this area of our border, and in exchange, you'll get the land on that border, as well as like a third of the tax revenue. So certain barbarian tribes become rich from this, like the Franks in what becomes France, which is named after them, right? So, Julius Caesar conquers Gaul, which becomes France, and then the Romans come up with this deal with the Franks to protect that northern border. So the Franks, as a result, become wealthy, and they start sharing in the prosperity of Rome. But think about the implications. If you are counting militarily on barbarians for protection, and if you don't have your own standing army to protect Rome, I mean, what's to stop these barbarian armies from just turning on Rome?
Nothing.
Right? So
what causes that shift, and when does it happen from Roman citizens being the military and army to the barbarians being mercenaries?
Well, like what makes that happen?
Yeah.
It's a great question, but some have argued that it's the bread dole. It's like bread in circuses. Like people didn't want to fight anymore. People got soft in Rome, and the only people who were crazy enough to die in battle were these German barbarians. Let them fight and die, right?
I see. Okay.
So
and when does that happen, more or less?
It was outsourced. We see this today. I mean, we're literally seeing this today in like other countries. I don't need to name them, but like dependency on mercenaries, in mass, it does not work out. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to know when, if we're talking from year 1 to 499, when does that start happening? Because you said there's major implications.
So it comes to a head. I can't tell you when it starts, but what I can say is that it becomes a major issue to the point where the empire is starting to crumble in the early 5th century. So like starting in like 420 and going up until like 439 or so. Like at that point, it gets really dire. And like Attila, Attila the Hun, sorry, let me back up. So the German barbarians generally, they liked Rome and they wanted to be a part of it because Rome was wealthy and they weren't. Right? Rome had the best land, they had all the money. So barbarians wanted to be in Rome. They wanted to be a part of it. They wanted a share in the wealth, except the Huns. The Huns just wanted everybody to be destroyed. they weren't smart people, but they were excellent at like killing people. So their goal was to just destroy everything and take all the money, right? Okay. And then once they spent all the money, they had no plan. So in the early 400s, Attila starts, making his way towards Rome militarily, and there's no one to stop them because Rome is dependent on these barbarians to protect them, right? So there's nobody to protect them. And the only thing that stops Attila is Pope Leo I, who goes and meets Attila, and like everybody wonders, what did Pope Leo say? Yeah. But he somehow convinces Attila to stop. And then Attila dies like a month or a year later or something like that. So so thanks, Pope Leo, for saving Rome. And now he's considered, I think, the first great, Pope Leo the Great.
That's right. Yeah.
So he saves Rome for a couple of decades, right? But then more things happen, and it really becomes these federati, these mercenary relationships that ends Rome.
Okay.
So the Vandals take over North Africa, which I mentioned before, is where all the grain is coming from that's feeding the Roman people. So once the Vandals take over, these were smart barbarians. They had a navy. They understood economics. If you're trying to capture the wealth of Rome, like, you could fight them for Rome, or you could take away their grain fields. Guess how many soldiers there were? Not many. They only had a couple thousand people, and they took over all of North Africa.
Yeah, it's like you said earlier, how you take out one of the economic pieces and it just crumbles.
The whole thing crumbled. So without the grain, Rome was quickly spiraling out of control.
Okay, I have another. It's kind of a random question. Do these barbarian tribes have any, what's the connection between them? Are they hostile toward one another? Or they feel some sort of kinship at all? I'm not familiar.
So their system of ethics is not based off of a legal code, but more of like a very tight-knit kinship code. And there's actually there's documents that show exactly how it was, like the Burgundian Code.
Okay.
Where if if somebody kills your brother, like, what do you get to do in response, right? So it's very tight-knit. It's very small. Like 50 households, like that. That was kind of like the max level. And every once in a while, a little tribe of 50 households would get together with another one and another one, and they decide, okay, we're going to take over northern Africa, right?
Okay.
So does that answer your question?
I think so. I guess my question is like interrelational.
Did the Franks hang out with the Visigoths?
Yeah, that.
Not really.
Okay.
But it, there's so much unknown. The guy who ends up sacking Rome in the late 400s, his name is Odovacer.
Okay.
And there's so many spellings of his name. You want to know why?
Why?
Because he probably didn't know how to spell his own name. Who knows? Who knows? And I don't even know what tribe he's from. Like, what if it was a whole bunch of tribes who just decided to gather one day to impromptu, just let's go sack Rome.
Yeah.
So it's hard. They weren't very good at documenting themselves. Everything we know about these barbarians, we know from Roman authors.
I see. So they didn't document their own.
Not too well. Now, one exception to that is the Burgundian Code, which I mentioned before.
Yeah.
But generally, we know about the barbarians from what the Romans have to say about them.
Okay.
Which, I would take all of that with a grain of salt.
Gotcha.
But the Romans, some of the Romans saw them as noble in a lot of ways. So they lived a simpler life. Their economic system was semi-nomadic, right? So they raised cattle, but it was like the kind that could move a little bit. Their house structures were less elaborate. They weren't building structures that would last 2,000 years like the Romans were. And they supplemented their income with plunder. So they were fighters. They would fight other people. Sometimes they'd fight each other. Perhaps opportunistic.
Okay, what is plunder?
Plunder is just you're stealing people's stuff.
Like,
booty? Booty, like pirates. For pirates we would say booty. For barbarians we would say plunder. But you see a city that's weak, you go and you beat up those people and you take their stuff. Gotcha. That's plunder. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, so I also want to reel it back again a little. So I think I'm understanding, hopefully our audiences too, the Roman economy, the role of the barbarians later on in those first 500 years. But I think I kind of want to connect it now more to the Israelite people, to Jesus.
Yeah. To Christianity.
Yes,
Yeah.
to Christianity. Yeah. So, I don't know if I have a specific question. I kind of just want to reel it back and start to connect all these economic pieces with.
Yeah. So I know this doesn't sound like Catholic economics so far today, but here it goes. The Roman Empire suddenly becomes friendly to Christianity during the time of Constantine, the emperor, right? So at that point, Christianity is not only influencing people on the micro level, but there's also this like macro understanding of what it is and what it stands for. So, before Constantine and before the legalization of Christianity, the Roman people were perplexed and sometimes inspired by Christians. Like Julius Caesar gave bread to poor people because it was helping him. But the Christians were giving bread to poor people because they loved them. It's just that's shocking. That's shocking. And before Constantine, people were just very inspired by that. Not all people, right? Some people were more impressed by power, but still others were impressed by love. So once Constantine legalizes Christianity, and then eventually Christianity becomes even popular, Christian principles, Christian economic principles, Christian moral principles start infiltrating the culture as a whole. And we see the economy slightly changing century by century by Christianity. So we talked about the dependency of the whole economy on slavery. Well, for the first time in writing, we see Catholic theologians, doctors of the church, questioning whether slavery is appropriate at all. So Gregory of Nyssa in the 300s, he starts saying if every human person has infinite dignity, the infinite dignity of every human person, slavery doesn't make sense. And slavery is a sin against the law of nature, he'll say. Now, this is a big deal. Why? Because in Greek culture and in Roman culture, which is largely influenced by Aristotle and others, slavery is believed to be part of the natural order. There's smart people, there's dumb people, and the dumb people should be slaves and the smart people should be in charge, right? That's Aristotle. That's the natural order according to the Greeks. But Jesus, and before Jesus, Judaism, there was this idea of human solidarity, right? And then with Jesus, the infinite dignity of the human person, and Gregory of Nyssa, St. Augustine, Basil, the Cappadocian fathers up in Turkey, they believed that slavery was wrong. And what we see is that people are being influenced by that. So there's even evidence of Roman senators who own latifundia, right? They're giving their estates up. They're freeing their slaves and maybe turning them into peasants, right? And they, from extreme wealth, they live in a hut. And this is the transformation of people's hearts affects the way that economics works. It affects the way that leadership is seen. So Saint Martin of Tours, he's elected bishop, and he doesn't even want to be. He runs away, and he hides in a shed, and the only reason people find him is because some geese give him away. They start quacking. But before, Julius Caesar is fighting and killing people to come to power, and power before Christianity meant strength, wealth, right? But Saint Martin, why are people putting him in power? Because he doesn't want it. Because he wants to be humble. He wants to live simply. Like the whole structure, the whole idea of power, and like it flips upside down, right? So we see that Christianity starts really having an effect on what good leadership is. Even today, we're asking these questions, right? What an economy looks like that assumes that every single human being has dignity, right? Major philosophical changes going on in the 3rd and 4th centuries.
Yeah. Okay. So to try to make it a little more concrete, this might be difficult because it's going to be like on the spot. But so, I mean, you mentioned that the Roman world is slowly but certainly getting influenced by, the Christian moral values, economic values, and principles. Would you be able to, let's say, start with, Jesus's life? Or we can maybe give a short timeline and then unpack it as the episode goes on. But then maybe start with Jesus's life, then the apostolic era, and then maybe some of the church fathers, and then maybe give like a brief connection how maybe each timeline, the Roman understanding of power and economics and how it started changing. Maybe like, 1st century, this is what the Roman scene was like. 2nd century, this is what it was like. And then maybe make connections to either the apostles or the church fathers as we go. But again, that's what it's,
Yeah, that's a big question. That's like a lecture. I could try to do it to do it quickly. So,
but I think I think it's worth it because I think you painted the picture well about what the Roman economy looked like, and then maybe what started to happen throughout the first 500 years. And then I think either our listeners know or we've kind of unpacked what has happened, biblically and with the church in the first 500 years. So maybe make those connections a little more concrete.
Sure. So, So in the 1st century, we have Jesus and the apostles and Paul. The emperors are Augustus and Claudius and Nero, and power at that time. The economy is that big global economy, slave based, mercenary, Ferrari based, latifundia, like these giant estates, right? So that's the system in the 1st century, and it's crushing individuals, right? Especially the Israelites. And the Israelites, as a result, are rebelling. Right before Jesus, there's this guy named Judas the Galilean who thinks that the answer is military battle against the Romans. He's killed. Jesus proposes a totally different understanding, not too concerned about like military victory at all, right? But more concerned about changing hearts, which change families, which change communities locally, which changes towns and societies, and eventually it'll even change the Roman Empire, right? Like this conversion of the heart has actually giant economic impact, which we'll see. So still, a lot of people don't follow Jesus early on. It's just a few. The apostles are spreading these Christian concepts throughout the world from, northern Spain to the southern tip of India in the first 100 years. But still, most people reject that, see it as, nonsense.
Yeah.
So by the year 70, the majority of the Jews revolt against Rome, which is unsuccessful, and Rome destroys Jerusalem. The temple is literally blown up. Some people ask, like, how could you blow up a stone temple? Well, that stone had air in it. So if you light a big fire next to the stone, really? It explodes. It literally, like, blew up in the air.
The temple was destroyed year 70.
In the year 70, yeah.
And with just lighting it on fire, and it just blows up.
Right,
so they were hollow stones.
Filled with, the stones were like filled with air bubbles. Just like naturally.
Oh,
as
I
they
see,
form.
I see,
yeah,
I see,
yeah.
I see.
So those air bubbles heat up, and it's just
Gotcha. Okay.
So the Jewish population in Israel is just decimated at that point, and then there's this big diaspora of Jews throughout the world as a result of that destruction. So Christians are also scattered as a result, and are scattered throughout the world. So these people become seeds in all the communities, whether it's in France or India or Spain or Armenia, everywhere, Rome, right? These seeds are planted, and it takes a while for these things to start growing. So, in the year 155, people in Rome are complaining about Christians. They think they're weird. And they don't know why, because it's secret. If you're not Catholic back then, if you're not Christian, you can't go to Mass. So people start making up rumors. And there's this guy, Justin Martyr, who starts talking about Christian financial practices, Christian worship, and how it works, just to kind of like ease people's fears about what Christianity could be. So still, like at that in the second century, around the year 155, people are skeptical of Christianity. They're intrigued. They're slightly inspired by the way they treat the poor, depending on the person, right?
Okay.
In the 200s, we see that Christianity continue to get bigger, and as a result, they're seen as a threat, and they're suppressed by certain emperors, and there's some persecutions, and this is when the Colosseum is built, so we know about that stuff. And but the growth is still rather slow. But then there's this accelerated growth around the year 325, when Constantine and that Nicene Council assembles. The first 50 Bibles are produced and sent in Greek.
Wow.
Still, Latin doesn't come to be.
Where are they sent?
To 50 different cities.
Okay.
And two or three of them are still intact.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So like the bishops?
Yeah, to the big churches.
Okay.
The big 50 churches back then. But one is sent to Rome, and it's still at the Vatican. It's called the Codex Vaticanus, right?
Wow.
The oldest Bible ever.
Wow.
The other one is the Codex Sinaiticus, which was found right next to Mount Sinai in a monastery, but now it's online. You could go see it online.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is in the 200s.
So right around the year 325 is when those Bibles were assembled, and all in Greek.
Okay.
All capital Greek letters, which bothers me because St. Paul wrote in lowercase. So,
Okay.
so by the year 325, Christianity is legalized, and it's really affecting the way that people think, including people in power. So the idea of what power is being questioned. The idea of what human dignity is being raised. And what Aristotle and Greek philosophy saw as human and dignity and what a society should look like is changing. It's really, really changing. And at the same time, Rome is getting into very sketchy financial practices, right? So in the time of let's say Claudius, there was probably 800,000 to 1 million people in Rome. Next episode, we're going to talk about Charlemagne being crowned emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in Rome in the year around the year 800. By that time, there's 30,000 people in Rome.
Wow.
So how do we go from 800,000 to 30,000? Mm-hmm. How does Rome fall apart? It's this house of cards built off of, that very intricate but delicate Roman economy, dependency on the Ferrari, these barbarians, dependency on slavery, which Christianity undercuts, right? Mm-hmm. What do we need to do when this house of cards falls? We need to kind of, we'll keep what's good from the past, but something new needs to come about.
Yeah.
And this is where Catholic social teaching on economics comes in.
Okay.
There's a little bit of the good from the old with the Roman Empire. There's a little bit of good that comes from even the barbarians. There's something that we have something to learn from them. And then we're going to add brand new principles that come from Judaism and Christianity.
Okay. I kind of want to stay in return to the 4th century with Constantine.
Yeah.
So you said in the 4th century, that's when, so 3rd century, some Romans are a little skeptical still of Christianity, but then 4th century is Constantine, and he convert to Christianity.
Yes.
So then what does that mean then between, Rome, the Roman Empire's relationship to Christianity, big picture?
There's ebbs and flows, high points and low points, but in general, that's kind of like a starting point for the public expression of Christianity, right? So before that, it was, like the idea of a church that uses the basilica structure, kind of unthinkable. But after Constantine, because what basilica is? I think it just means like big building. Okay. And it's a Roman idea of fitting a whole bunch of people inside. Okay. With the least amount of columns blocking your view.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that's what a basilica is, and it's a Roman idea. It's not a Christian or Catholic thing. But for the first time, like Christians will build a structure for worship, utilizing that architectural type of a basilica just to fit as many people in as possible. What does that say? The Christians using a basilica. Number one, it says that they're willing to invest in something that will stand for a long time because they have confidence that it will be allowed to.
Yeah.
Right? So there's that security of being able to practice. And also, if you need to fit a lot of people in a building, it means that there's a lot of people that want to go to mass, right? So there's a demand for a big structure because there's so many Christians, right? Now, when anything gets popular and big, there's danger, which isn't the subject of this podcast, but what you start seeing also is people who want to become Christian just to fit in, people who want to be Christian because it's expedient for their business. So what we get is maybe at that time, like quasi-Christians, people who are Christian in name but not in practice, and so forth. So there's effects to going public.
Yeah, interesting. I wouldn't think that there'd be quasi-Christians in the first.
Oh, there are.
5 centuries.
Yeah. Even St. Augustine writes about this in North Africa in the 380s. He sees this guy who wants to become Christian and goes through like RCIA just because it's good for his business.
Wow.
And Augustine talks about like why or why not he's going to let him go through like what was RCIA back then.
Wow. So where do Augustine and other church fathers start to fit in? What do they start doing for Christianity and then for the rest of the world if it's growing to the basilica level?
Yeah, so they are they're building theological structures for being able to explain this to each other and to the world. So they're engaging in the Greek classics and comparing and contrasting Christianity to Greek culture and other cultures. They're fine-tuning language to describe who Jesus is. They're excellent preachers and basically celebrities. As much as I'm against like Catholic celebrities, these guys were Catholic celebrities, and they would gather huge amounts of people for their sermons because they were very insightful and great orators. Augustine was trained in rhetoric; he knew how to talk, he knew how to write, he knew how to talk. So they were inspiring. They also started building structures. So like Saint Macrina was building hospitals and caring for the poor. And these weren't just like one time, like one person helping one person, like giant structures of caring for strangers and the poor and for people were being built by Christians. And it was evident that like Christians are like good for people,
Yeah.
good for society.
Yeah.
So this was the stuff of the church fathers in the late fourth century,
Okay.
the 380s.
Okay, so it sounds like Christianity is starting or continuing to grow, expand, with not only, I don't know, theological understanding and spread, but also, like you're saying, structures, economic structures, maybe even. But it's like we mentioned, Rome is not doing the same. Rome is kind of going the other way.
It's so funny. It's almost as if, just look at a body of water, and you just dip your head underneath the water. You see one person diving and the other person floating up at the same time. That's kind of like Christianity in the Roman Empire.
Okay.
Like one is going down and the other is coming up.
Yeah.
And,
so then, how are those two connected then? What?
Well, it's funny you ask, because everybody else was asking that question. As Rome was falling apart and as Christianity was rising, some people made the argument like, actually, Christianity destroyed Rome. Because Christianity made people from powerful to soft, and they became easily conquerable, right? So Augustine writes a huge response to that. I think it's the City of God, right?
That is a huge response.
Yeah. It's an excellent book, but he's making the argument that that's not the case. And here's the thing. Jesus, Judaism, Jesus, Christianity, Catholicism, these things are going to last forever. And it might sound crazy to Romans in the 4th century, but Rome isn't going to last forever. No country will. Countries come and go. And Catholicism is this steady force that's dependable, right? So Christianity, it was on the rise then. The Catholic Church is growing right now? I know in North America it seems to be like flat or dying, and same in Europe, but actually like worldwide, Christianity and Catholicism, they're growing.
Wow.
Right? We're in a growth phase. And it's in the Southern Hemisphere, of course. But my point is that Rome had what it hurt itself, and it was getting what it deserved. Right? So the economic structures of Rome could have not survived for long. Once the grain was taken away from Rome, that was the beginning of the end. So Attila was able to just walk right in. He was just convinced by Pope Leo to not finish the job. But soon after that, Odovacer, that barbarian king, and I don't know where he came from or how to spell his name, but he came and he sacked Rome, and that was kind of like, what most historians would say, like, all right, that's the real end. Okay. In my opinion.
When was that?
476 or so. So Odovacer, of course, he had no idea of how to run an empire. So he was
one of the dumb barbarians.
Yeah, he was. I don't think he was that intelligent. So he was very good at winning battles. So he won. He takes over Rome, and then he like sits and he asks himself like, now what do I do? I have no idea of how to run an empire. So he writes a letter to Constantinople and he says, hey, you're in charge. I don't want to be in charge. You're in charge, which has no effect because by that point, the Eastern Empire didn't have a lot of influence on the West. So he just kind of sits in Rome for a couple of years until somebody else kills him. And it's just like one thing after another. But so here's the question. If the barbarians take over Rome politically, and if Constantinople can't really fill the void, and if barbarians don't know how to run anything, what happens? This is a good segue to the next episode.
Yeah.
In many, many circumstances, it's the church that is given this authority, even sometimes in economics. So who was it that saved the Roman Empire from Attila? Was it the military? No. Was it the government? No, it was the Pope. And who becomes in charge of local areas once the giant global Roman system falls apart? Oftentimes, it's leaders of the church. Okay. And often it's bishops. So the word king is a German word. It's a barbarian word, right? So we get all these little military kingdoms, which replaces militarily the Roman system, and they start creating their own sense of law and order, which is barbaric, but it's tempered by the bishops. There's examples next week we're going to talk about of bishops actually telling kings what to do, and the kings listen for a couple of reasons, which we'll talk about. But the fall of the Roman Empire leads to a void, a political void, an economic void, right? Like, just think about the economic system that just collapsed. Like, how do you fix that? How do you recover from that? Well, one major thing is ruralization. We go from, 1 million people in Rome to 30,000, right, in like 400 years. So we see a ruralization. And we also see the church starting to really Christianize the economic system, which becomes more local. It's unique. Remember in episode 2 when we were talking about the Old Testament system and subsidiarity? Yeah. Local farms bringing their tithe to something that was somewhat close to serve the priests. Yeah. And then the priests give it to Jerusalem, the capital. It's almost as if now, we're moving back into that era. Okay. So the giant corporate global system falls apart, and we're almost back to like 12th century BC Israel.
Gotcha. Okay. So the Christianity being on the rise, and I assume maintaining kind of the similar principles that we already talked about in episodes 2 and 3. Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's a great opportunity to build a relationship. Like the void, almost like you mentioning kings. It sounds less like the church just comes in as the authority or like a supreme power, but as in like it kind of supports the barbarians or whatnot. Like a relationship almost. I don't know if that's
there's a relationship for sure. First of all, a lot of these barbarians are Christian, right? How much does Christianity affect them? I think that varies per barbarian. And arguments have been made that some of these barbarians were better than the Romans. Like, barbarians didn't have slaves, generally. They didn't believe in divorce. There's elements of barbarian society that's actually closer to Christianity. I know barbarian doesn't sound good, right? But there's elements of those societies that were more Christian, actually, naturally, than the Roman society was. So a lot of barbarians become Christian. A lot of them are influenced by the church because they believe in the spiritual power of the church, right? And the church, as a result, begins to Christianize the barbarian economic system. And remember, the barbarians didn't know how to run economic systems really, other than like steal stuff and raise some cattle. So a lot of the Roman systems, even the global system falls apart. A lot of the Roman laws and other micro parts of the financial system remain even once the barbarians take over. So, by the year 500, we have some aspects of the old Roman system, the old Roman economy still in place. We have the barbarians and their system. And then we have Christianity slowly influencing that soup of economics.
Yeah, the
right?
melting pot.
And here's a spoiler or a teaser for the future. The slaves of Rome will eventually turn into serfs. And those serfs are going to turn into peasants, right? Because they have dignity. Mm-hmm. The peasants are going to, due to circumstance and the and the influence of the gospel, they're going to earn more and more rights, more and more power. They're going to start small businesses. Then they're going to start guilds. Then they're going to start really thriving, right? Okay. So that's kind of where we're going.
Yeah.
And it's going to have influences on what the church has to say about economic goods, how it serves society, how it serves individuals. We're going to start developing real principles. And we'll eventually get to 1891,
Okay. Yeah.
where the official Catholic teaching on economics starts being released.
Gotcha. Okay. So, I mean, we're getting to year 500, basically. We're there. But there's still a lot to unpack about where we are and about what's to come. But like you said yourself, I think this is a good point to then segue and end this episode and start the next one. So, I mean, any final thoughts besides the teaser that you would have to wrap up this episode?
Yeah, just one. Thanks for asking. So, what in Catholic social teaching on economics? What's good about the past? What's bad? Like, do we as Catholics reject everything from the Roman Empire? Do we reject everything from the past? No. Do we cling to everything from the past? No. This is an act. It's an exercise of prudence, of discernment. What was good? Keep it. What was bad? Get rid of it. Right? So one of the great sins of the Enlightenment in the 18th century was that it wanted to just restart everything. Let's restart our moral system. Let's restart our religious system. Let's restart our economic and political system. And totally forget about the past. As Catholics, I think we're a little smarter than that, right? We say, okay, what from the past was good? So did Christianity just forget about everything the Roman Empire had to offer? No, there were some good things. The Roman Empire created the diocesan system. The church kept that because it was good. The Roman Empire created certain sorts of laws, like canon law, which we kept because it was good, right? So let's keep what's good, right? But let's get rid of the bad. Slavery, bad, right? Other things. So as Catholics today in the 21st century, should we be clinging to the past, to a past moment in history for economics? No. We should not be thinking about the past and saying, oh, let's bring that back. We should be influenced by the past, be aware of it, respect what we could learn from it, and then pave a new forward based off of the principles that the church gives us.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that sounds like a great, I think, wrap up to this episode. And I think it's an attitude, again, to keep for the episodes to come. So you're 500 to 1,000, same attitude. What worked, what didn't, and then from then on. I like it. Thanks. But yeah, I mean, that does it for this episode. We'll hope to see you on episode 4. And again, if you're not subscribed at this point and you're making it, or we hope to see you for episode 5. And if you're not subscribed at this point, what are you doing? I'm a little disappointed that it's been this many episodes and you're not subscribed. But please do subscribe, drop a like, wherever you're listening. If you're on YouTube, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we release. And also, make sure to check out the other podcasts produced by the Diocese, which are Beyond the Beacon, hosted by Bishop Kevin Sweeney and Jay Agnish, and Coffee with Cupkey, hosted by Monsignor Raymond Cupkey and Father Paul Manning. On top of that, a special thanks again to Joe Ginexi and Caitlin Ferrari, our production team. And with all that said, I just want to say thank you to all of you for listening to the Paul Street Journal. See you next time.